In May 2024, the whole world signed Drake's death certificate. Kendrick Lamar hadn't just humiliated him with Not Like Us, he had morally annihilated him in front of millions. The streets handed down their sentence, and the culture exiled him. But there's a slight problem with that narrative. Today, in July 2026, Drake still sits inside the top 3 most streamed artists in the entire history of the platform, embedded so deep into the infrastructure of the music industry that no single scandal, no matter how humiliating, has been able to remove him. How is it possible that a publicly repudiated artist remains the king of the algorithm? Almost nobody in the industry wants to admit the real answer. Because while Kendrick won the war of authenticity, Drake mutated the battlefield entirely. He stopped playing by the rules of cultural respect and activated a shield built on market asphyxiation and corporate psychopathy. Welcome to the Unseen Play. Today we are going to decode how a cornered titan applied the philosophy of absolute power to become untouchable. You will discover the dark legal revenge nobody saw coming, and why in the modern world, ubiquity will always crush morality. To understand Drake's survival, you have to go back before the fame, before OVO, before any of it. As a teenager acting on Degrassi, Drake was the only income in his household. His mother was seriously ill, and his paycheck from Canadian television, barely $50,000 a year, was the only thing keeping the lights on. He has said it himself, they were poor, genuinely broke, a level of precariousness most of his fans never picture when they think of him today. That kind of instability leaves a mark. It doesn't just create ambition, it creates an obsession with control, a conviction that emotional approval is worthless if it can't be converted into structural security. Understanding that is the key to understanding everything that came after. But surviving 2024 also required understanding the mistake 99% of people make when analyzing this conflict. They believe the ultra-wealthy actually care about morality. In his History of Western Philosophy, Bertrand Russell dedicates a profound analysis to Niccolò Machiavelli, the Renaissance thinker who first separated ethics from power. Machiavelli wrote that a ruler doesn't need to be good, he only needs to be indispensable. Drake understood this perfectly. When Kendrick Lamar exposed Drake's personal demons, he expected him to collapse under the weight of public shame. And for a normal human being, that would have happened. But Drake applied the Machiavellian Disconnect. He realized that in platform capitalism, your reputation on Twitter doesn't pay dividends on Wall Street. He stopped trying to win back the respect of rappers and focused entirely on securing his monopoly over the music industry's infrastructure. Drake's survival strategy wasn't silence, it was saturation. We call this the Algorithmic Shield. In nature, some predators survive by being invisible. Drake survived by being inescapable. After his defeat, he flooded the market. Cross-collaborations, editorial playlists, international features. He embedded himself so deeply into the source code of Spotify and Apple Music that trying to boycott Drake became mathematically impossible without giving up mainstream music altogether. He wasn't dropping songs to win lyrical awards, he was dropping auditory malware. He was suffocating the market so the oxygen of public conversation would run out. If the algorithm dictates what the silent majority listens to, controlling the algorithm means you can ignore the loud minority that hates you. But there's a darker footnote to this dominance. In late 2025, a lawsuit surfaced alleging that a portion of those numbers weren't organic at all, pointing to abnormal bot activity tied to promotional money from one of Drake's own corporate partnerships. Nothing has been proven in court, but if even part of it is true, it tells you something even colder about this philosophy. For a true Machiavellian, it doesn't matter if the empire is real, only that it looks unbreakable. This denial of public reality borders on a psychological condition philosophy calls solipsism, the belief that only one's own mind is sure to exist, and everything outside of it is an illusion. Drake isn't a solipsist in the strict philosophical sense, but he built himself a functional version of one, a bubble where the only piece of reality that gets through is his cash flow. But to protect that bubble, he needed armor bigger than himself. And this is where Thomas Hobbes' theory of the Leviathan comes in. Hobbes argued that humans surrender their freedom to an absolute authority, a monster, to avoid being destroyed in the anarchy of the state of nature. Hobbes even described this authority as an artificial man, built from contracts instead of flesh. Drake transformed his brand, OVO, into exactly that, his own Leviathan. He built ironclad contracts, corporate alliances with Nike, and high-stakes casino partnerships. He stopped being a Canadian rapper to become a transnational corporation, an artificial person in its own right. And you can't cyberbully a corporation into shutting down. You have to bankrupt it. Something that Kendrick Lamar, no matter how lyrically brilliant, could never do. And that is exactly why Drake's response to Not Like Us wasn't another song. It was a declaration of institutional war. Drake executed his darkest play, suing his own record label, Universal Music Group, accusing them of knowingly weaponizing Kendrick's song against him for profit. And here's where it gets philosophically interesting. It's tempting to call this Nietzsche's raw will to power, the Übermensch refusing to accept defeat. But Nietzsche himself would have hated this move. A true Nietzschean noble doesn't run to a courtroom. He settles things directly, by force of will. What Drake is actually doing is closer to what Nietzsche sneered at as ressentiment. The weak using the tools built by institutions, laws, and appeals to get indirect revenge on an enemy they couldn't defeat head-on. Drake, ever the pragmatist, doesn't care which philosopher would approve of him. He only cares that it works. A federal judge dismissed his original lawsuit in October 2025, ruling the lyrics were opinion, not fact. Drake didn't stop there. He appealed, and the case is still sitting in front of a federal appeals court as we speak. Nobody on his legal team has ever confirmed a number, but industry insiders and legal analysts have speculated the damages he's chasing could reach as high as $100 million. Whether or not that number is real, the strategy behind it is. Drake forced his real enemies, the industry executives, to sit in federal court under oath, bleeding millions in legal fees. It's a cold, calculated, passive-aggressive revenge that drains his adversary's resources without him ever having to sweat in a recording studio. In the end, Drake's case study leaves us with a hard red pill to swallow about the world we live in. In 2008, Wall Street banks destroyed the global economy, but the government bailed them out because they were too big to fail. They were too massive, and if they fell, the entire system collapsed. Drake engineered his career on that exact same premise. If Spotify loses Drake, it loses millions of active subscriptions. If Universal loses Drake, its stock crashes. Sitting on a fortune estimated near $400 million, he wove his existence into the very pillars of entertainment capitalism. And in early 2026, reports surfaced that Drake was in talks to sell part of OVO to a major brand management conglomerate. To the outside world, that looked like weakness. Inside Drake's own logic, it was the final move, turning himself into an asset so intertwined with global capital that letting him fail would cost more than saving him. Kendrick Lamar proved that authenticity, truth, and clinical therapy can win a historic moral and cultural battle. But Drake taught us a much more cynical lesson. In the game of absolute power, you don't need the culture's forgiveness if you own the platform where the culture operates. And in case anyone doubted his appetite for round 2, in May 2026, Drake dropped 3 albums in a single night: Iceman, Habibti, and Maid of Honor, his first solo material since the feud. On Iceman, he didn't just move on. He took direct aim again, at Kendrick, at Universal's own CEO, and at anyone who thought he'd learn to stay quiet. The empire wasn't just surviving, it was still swinging. If there is one thing you must learn from the fall and survival of Drake, it is that a kid who once watched his sick mother count every dollar from a TV paycheck never really stopped building walls. Kendrick's stoicism and purity are admirable, but mechanical, corporate resilience makes you invincible in the real world. Never allow an emotional defeat to destroy your financial infrastructure. Isolate your mind from public opinion. Build your own algorithmic shield in your niche, and become so structurally necessary that your enemies literally cannot afford your failure. If you made it this far, you belong to that 1% who doesn't consume entertainment just to get distracted, but to extract real power tactics. Subscribe to the Unseen Play, because the next hidden move in the industry is already happening right in front of your eyes, and we are going to decode it.